The 26-year-old accused of gunning down UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson back in New York via plane, then helicopter. Luigi Mangione greeted with new charges and a slew of heavily armed law enforcement, the police commissioner, even the mayor.
846, everybody. It's been the story that all of you have been talking about for over a week now. The murder of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, the subsequent arrest, of his alleged killer, Luigi Mangione.
NewsNation's Chris Cuomo talked to Mangione's lawyer last night. Chris is joining us now. Good morning to you, Chris. Thanks for joining us so early. The lawyer says he hasn't seen any evidence that Mangione killed Thompson. So what else did he say?
Well, first of all, we know that he must have a vision problem, right? Because there's nothing but proof that he did it, not least of which is that despite everything that we've seen, when he had an opportunity to address cameras, he just explained his motive for doing it. So, look. This lawyer is doing what lawyers do, which is playing it by the book. He is a Pennsylvania lawyer. Yeah. I don't know, and I highly doubt he will be in charge when New York gets its extradition request, charges him with homicide, maybe terror-related charges. So this is a guy who's more of a functionary right now to help the family pace the accused through the process.
Yeah, I mean, we had the NYPD on this morning, Chris. They were telling us about the manifesto, the bullets, the details, the gun, right, the backpack, everything that was on his person when he was there at the McDonald's, so on and so forth. Here's the thing that's so interesting, right? And that's the sympathy that Mangione is now getting, right? The case is the case, but obviously murder is not the answer. We don't want to glorify that, but people not at all happy with the healthcare industry, in the industry overall. People even offering to pay for the legal fees. Yeah. I mean, what's your take on all of that?
So you just said it better than I have, frankly, over the last couple of days. I haven't been getting this right, and not because I don't understand the duality at play. We're dealing with two things being true at the same time, okay? There is no supporting what this guy did. First of all, he's not even a victim of the system, okay? His family makes a fortune off of healthcare. That's the irony here. Yeah, he had a back injury, had back pain. He's a rich guy. He's not somebody who has been targeted the way many have. Now, here's the problem. Even suggesting that, you have to give voice to why people would show any support for what this guy did, right? We're not savages. We're not terrorists. This is not an extreme Islamist culture that we live in. So what is it about? You do have to give voice to how the health insurance business is uniquely pernicious. It is uniquely predatory. It is uniquely life-threatening, ironically. Why? Because after your mortgage, healthcare is your biggest nut. And if you have any problem, you are one major medical need away from being broke.
Right.
They slow walk claims and they chase you like sprinters when you owe them money. And it is a huge burden in society that we don't discuss for one really terrible reason. And I'm going to address it tonight on the show. And I should have addressed it sooner, but I didn't want to conflate an assassin with a righteous cause, because I don't believe there is a connection there. But Donald Trump is the ultimate disruptor in your lifetime and mine in terms of political figures in America. Have you noticed he never mentions the healthcare companies?
Right.
He'll talk about the ACA or Obamacare. He does not talk about these companies. The reason the system is the way it is, my brother and sister, is because they have the power. And people are afraid of them because of the money, the employment base, and the lobbying political base. And that needs to be exposed too, not just what was wrong with this young guy.
And that goes to what the NYPD were telling us this morning. We had Chief Shell on and the Deputy Commissioner of Operations who were saying that it's not just the healthcare industry now that are being threatened. They're seeing posters go up around New York for threats amongst the healthcare industry as well as other big companies, corporate America.
Well, look, the Occupy thing we've been through.
Yeah.
There is always a radicalization aspect. It was here in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. We just have social media now that magnifies minorities. But here is something to counterbalance that. You got three different people on the screen right now. Well, now you just have one huge piñata head, which is me. But when you see all three anchors at the same time, all three of us, different life experiences, different backgrounds. I guarantee you, each of us, and even though you guys are young, okay, and I don't even know where you are in the kid game yet, which each of us have had a hard time with insurance companies.
Yep.
Guaranteed. My family, we're fighting with one right now. It's probably going to go to litigation.
Yep.
You know, so that reality has to be spoken to also. We got to balance as journalists. What this guy did is wrong all day long. But there is a huge problem behind it that explains the perversity of the first assassination you and I have ever seen, where the calls to free the guy are more than to condemn the guy.
Exactly. All right, looking forward to the show tonight, Chris. Always good to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you unveil tonight. Good conversation.
I didn't mean to accuse you two of any kind of health care problems.
Oh, please. I think it's a common denominator, like you said, for so many of you.
I was kind of accusing. You, I don't really know. I wasn't accusing you. You, I was accusing. You know, you look like, I don't know about you.
Yeah, I know. Good to see you, Chris. His show, 8 p.m. tonight on NewsNation. Always good to talk to you.
A grand jury in New York is reportedly hearing evidence in the case against suspected gunman Luigi Mangione and the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Mangione isn't due in court again until December 30th, but Governor Kathy Hochul is already prepping for his extradition.
State has an important role to play to make sure that he is extradited from Pennsylvania, where he's being held in Altoona, Pennsylvania, bringing him back to the city of New York so he can, go through the criminal justice system. The DA's office in Manhattan is still working on putting together the charges. They must be ironclad. They're making sure they don't make any mistakes, and I appreciate the effort. As second that happens, I will be able to issue a warrant for extradition.
Okay, so a little explainer there. So Mangione's defense attorney can fight the extradition even though the NYPD has evidence linking Mangione to the deadly shooting. Criminal defense attorney Bernarda Villalona joining us now to walk us through the next stages of the legal process. So great to have you here, Bernarda. I want to talk about the court dates because it can get complicated, right? Because there's the case in Pennsylvania. That court date was pushed back to the 23rd. That was pushed back from the 23rd to another week, and that could delay the whole process of getting him here to New York, right?
No. So at this point, in terms of what's going on, the case is being presented to the grand jury. So ultimately, that's a different lane. But when we're talking about Pennsylvania, remember, he still has Pennsylvania criminal charges.
Right.
I used to be a prosecutor in Pennsylvania. So in terms of those criminal charges, if they move along, he's entitled to a preliminary hearing on those charges. But aside from that, they're also dealing with the extradition. And the defense counsel in Pennsylvania has said that he's going to fight extradition. In order to fight extradition, he has to formally put in his paperwork within 14 days in order to fight that extradition. So I'm not concerned about the change in dates because things are moving how they're supposed to be moving.
Okay, they can happen simultaneously, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's be clear about what the grand jury is doing, because I think people at home may not understand that. In order to charge with first-degree murder, a grand jury has to indict. Is that correct?
So in terms of the charges in this case, as of now, it's going to be murder in the second degree. Now, people get freaked out. They're like, well, why not murder in the first degree? New York, the murder in the second degree, when you read the elements of it, it's technically the murder in the first degree in other jurisdictions. Murder in the second degree has to deal with intent to cause the death of another person and causes the death of another person. In terms of murder in the first degree, you have to fit within a narrow class of individuals. Or you're a judge, or you're a police officer. In terms of were you attempted to commit a kidnapping, or terrorism, were you trying to commit some form of terrorism, and then you'll be charged with murder in the first degree. But that's not the case as of now in this case. Grand jury is going to be hearing evidence as to murder in the second degree.
As of now.
As of now.
So the charges could be upgraded.
Yes, they can change, but let's just be clear. In New York, there's not the death penalty. So when we're talking about murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree, murder in the second degree, the maximum sentence is 25 years to life. Murder in the first degree, it's life without the possibility of parole. That's the difference in terms of sentencing.
Right, so that's why somebody might look at that and say, well, why isn't it first degree? But to Cala's point, is it rare to have the grand jury hear evidence when it hasn't even brought here to New York yet?
No, not at all. And I was a prosecutor here in New York for 13 years. 10 of those years I was a homicide prosecutor, and we have presented cases to the grand jury without the body being in the state for several reasons. If you have some idea of where the body is, and here we know that he's in custody in Pennsylvania, you want to present the case to the grand jury, because what you want to do is try to secure an indictment so you can can use that indictment that there's probable cause to believe that he committed this crime, and you can use it as a part of the governor's warrant to get the body back to New York.
So that would help with the extradition process.
Absolutely.
So that is the point of. So I think a lot of people are wondering, how are you able to fight extradition if you have all this evidence against him?
So in terms of extradition, it's a different process. Extradition is what the prosecution has to show to the judge that this is the person that the state is looking for, that this is Luigi Mangione. So that's pretty much what the extradition hearing is going to be about. They'll put some evidence as to what the crime is, but it's not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt at that hearing.
When you're looking ahead now, just to potential trials and picking of a jury, and you always say, it's going to be tough to pick a jury and so on and so forth for every case, but when a case is so high profile as this, and tensions and feelings are so high, and he seems to have some sympathy from a lot of folks out there as well. What does that look like, and how does that factor into a jury selection?
Well, jury selection, of course, is going to be difficult. It's usually difficult in any high-profile case. Hey, look, this happened on December 4th, and we have people on both sides as to whether he's guilty, not guilty, as to whether he's justified in this killing. So you have those issues, but ultimately, when you select a jury, you question each one of those jurors, and you have to see whether they can be fair and impartial, despite of what they've heard in the news, because it's very difficult to be like, I've never heard of this case by the time the trial happens. So it's not about whether you heard about the case, it's whether, despite what you heard, can you be fair and impartial and judge the defendant's guilt based on what's presented inside of the courtroom. That
was going to be my question about that, because I just happened to be called for jury duty recently, and one of the questions is, have you heard about the case? Right? So almost everyone's going to say yes. So that question's almost obsolete. So it goes to now a further question of, despite what you heard, can you?
Yeah, and I would be concerned, actually, if I was a prosecutor or defense attorney, if you tell me you've never heard about this case. I'm like, this person is trying to get a jury and probably has a motive in trying to get on this jury. So that's a red flag for me if someone were to say that.
In your career, do you recall an accused gunman, an alleged killer, getting this much sympathy from the public, where people are trying to pay his legal fees, saying what he did was justified?
No, I have not encountered something like this. But then again, you have to think, this day and age with social media, this day and age with the internet, with just media in general, is that a lot of cases are getting so much attention that you're getting attention from all around the country. Usually back in the day, you get the case, you'll hear it in your local county or probably in that state, but not in a different state. So here, there's so many, there's sympathy on both sides, but the sympathy in terms of we've had our encounters having to deal with medical insurance being denied, or not even being able to afford health insurance at that. So I think people are taking out their anger or their emotions and showing it now with this killing, but still it doesn't justify taking the life of another individual.
Right. And we shouldn't glorify that either, but great to have you here, Bernarda. Always great conversation. Thank you kind of doing the explainer. There's so many different avenues of the story.
This was a frightening, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation. It occurred in one of the most bustling parts of our city, threatening the safety of local residents and tourists alike, commuters and business people just starting out on their day. Let me say a bit more about the charges. They include 1 count of murder in the first degree as a killing in furtherance of terrorism.
Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg outlining the charges against accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione and why he's calling it an act of terrorism. Tuesday afternoon, Bragg and Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch announced a multiple count indictment against Mangione, confirming an outline when the 26-year-old arrived in the city, his alleged movements before and after the shooting death of CEO Brian Thompson, among other things. Bragg says they have a strong case against Mangione, also talked about the ghost gun used, something the city has been dealing with, and the severity of the case. Also, Tisch reacting to a disturbing trend on social media since the murder.
In the nearly 2 weeks since Mr. Thompson's killing, we have seen a shocking and appalling celebration of cold-blooded murder. Social media has erupted with praise for this cowardly attack. People ghoulishly plastered posters threatening the other CEOs with an X over Mr. Thompson's picture, as though he was some sort of a sick trophy.
Good morning to you, Hazel and Vanessa. This comes 10 days after Luigi Mangione was captured in Pennsylvania. And now with these federal charges, there is the possibility of the death penalty. The 26-year-old accused of gunning down UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson back in New York via plane, then helicopter. Luigi Mangione greeted with new charges and a slew of heavily armed law enforcement, the police commissioner, even the mayor. His defense attorneys are a husband and wife team, Mark and Karen Friedman Agnafilo. They decried the new charges as highly unusual, raising double jeopardy concerns.
Speaking generally, we've had state prosecutions and federal prosecutions proceed as parallel matters.
Investigators shared a trove of evidence, including the notebook where he allegedly mused he wanted to whack an insurance executive, saying that target checks every box, and identifying the investor conference in Midtown as a windfall. The mayor addressing the morbid social support for this murder.
41% of those under the age of 30 believe that the shooting was justified. It's unacceptable.
Meanwhile, his defense attorney in court vehemently protesting the new federal charges, saying she was unaware they were filed against Mangione, going on to say the federal and state cases seem to be in conflict, going on to call them, quote, different cases. And there has been no application for bail at this point in time for Mangione. Meanwhile, when his family was reached for comment, they merely said that they stood by prior comments asking for prayers for all involved. We're live in Brooklyn this morning. I'm Kirsten Cole, Pix 11 News. Back to you, Hazel and Vanessa.
That 26-year-old CEO murder suspect Luigi Mangione waking up at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn this morning, where he's expected to remain until his next federal court appearance on January 18.
However, he could go before a judge on state charges before that. As for his charges in Pennsylvania, that case won't get underway until the proceedings in New York are complete. It's a lot to keep track of, and I know a lot of you are focused on this here to make sense of it all, is criminal defense attorney Bernardo Villalona. So great to have you back, Bernardo, to talk about this. Let's discuss first and foremost what exactly played out yesterday, because, I mean, we got from our sources that all of a sudden he was going to a federal building, which wasn't what was expected. Everybody was set up outside 100 Center Street, which we all know is where a lot of the local court cases take place. So what happened?
Complete chaos. And what I think really happened is that the feds and Alvin Bragg, they're duking it out as to who's going to prosecute Luigi Mangione, because it was planned yesterday that he was supposed to be arraigned on the state charges. Remember, he's been indicted by a grand jury here in New York County. So because he's been indicted by a grand jury here in New York County, now it's time for him to be arraigned. But instead, the feds took him and they lodged a criminal complaint, meaning that case hasn't been presented to a grand jury yet. Instead, they put him in front of a judge to tell him what the formal charges are and let him know that, of course, he's entitled to counsel, which he did have counsel there, and set another date. In fact, they're not even contesting the detention yet on the federal charges. So right now, we're waiting to see who's going to take precedent, who's going to take the lead as to the prosecution. But what Alvin Bragg said yesterday is that he intends to continue with his prosecution. So we're going to see parallel prosecutions with the feds and with the state.
Which means that this could really drag on. I mean, before they can even get anything underway. And then, like you said, who decides which case takes precedent?
Exactly. So you have to think. But again, the one that so far is advanced is the New York County case, because it's been presented to a grand jury already. So it's already met the initial stages. However, he has to be presented in front of a judge formally so he can be arraigned on that indictment.
Right. But how do the charges differentiate between the federal charges and the state charges? Because how do they differentiate in terms of what the penalty could be?
Well, huge difference. So in New York State, there's no longer a death penalty. So in terms of the charges on the New York State charges, the max that he faces on the murder in the first degree is life without the possibility of parole. On murder in the second degree, the maximum is 25 years to life with the possibility of parole. However, if we move on to the feds, if he is convicted, he will face life without any possibility of parole. But more importantly, there's an option of the death penalty. But of course, there's several stages that you have to go through before the death penalty as a penalty is even approved. And that ultimately is going to come from the president. And it's not going to be from President Biden, but instead under President Trump and whoever the attorney general is.
Right. Can you lay this out again, though? Because his attorneys, his defense team says the federal charges conflict with the state charges. Lay that out for us then.
Not necessarily. So because they're two different sovereign, let's consider it two nations. The feds is one nation and the state is is a different nation. So yes, you can go forward with federal charges and state charges, even though they derive from the same incident. Here, that Brian Thompson was killed on December 4th. The charges are different. They don't conflict with each other, and they can both travel at the same time. Think about it. It's done often. For example, with Derek Chauvin and the killing of George Floyd. Federal and state charges. However, the state charges went first and then the federal charges. Ahmaud Arbery, state charges went first, then the federal charges went. But what you normally don't see, and I'm surprised here, is ultimately having been a prosecutor here in New York, is that usually there's a discussion between the state and the federal and be like, you know what, feds, I'll let you handle the prosecution because you are using resources and it's redundant as well.
Yeah, can we talk about the arrival and just what it looked like? You know, usually the heliport in Lower Manhattan is for state dignitaries, the president, the Pope. We're seeing a criminal come out of a helicopter and greeted with such a show of force, right, from the state, local, federal level, plus the mayor, plus the police commissioner. Now, I did ask the mayor why he was there. He said, well, he wanted to let the city know that he was leading from the front and that this guy wouldn't be just welcomed in New York. But what did you make of the scene? It was something we've never seen before.
Exactly, exactly. And I've had, as a former prosecutor, I have had defendants that have been brought from other states, and sometimes they are driven in a car from another state. Other times they're in the back of a regular commercial airplane. People don't notice, but yes, there's a person that's being transported for the purposes of facing criminal charges. But what we saw yesterday, and that's an enormous sign of law enforcement, and I think it was twofold. Number one, because Luigi Mangione has gotten so much notoriety and that people are actually going to his side, like giving him money, donations, and coming out in full support, I think it was for, number one, his protection, but number two, to make sure that no one's trying to take him or get him out of custody. So also for the protection of law enforcement. So that's why there was such a showing of law enforcement there present. And also to send a message, because he's getting so much notoriety, that, look, this is not going to stop. Like, we're here and we're going to protect the citizens of New York. Like, this is unacceptable.
What does it likely look on the inside then for him? Because there's so much notoriety inside the jail right now, as far as security for him?
Well, you have to think, first off, he wasn't taken to Rikers Island. Instead, he was taken to a federal detention center in Brooklyn, New York, the Metropolitan Detention Center. So exactly where Diddy is. So that's where he's going to be held, at least for the time being. But what happens is when you have high-profile people in custody, persons in custody, they are separated from the general public. You rarely ever see them mixed amongst the general public, because the last thing that they want to hear is that something happened to that person while in custody. So they're separated.
Ask you real quick about the details of what we saw play out in the courtroom with these notebooks.
Yes.
That was damning evidence. Now, there's DNA evidence and all the other stuff, but these notebooks showed a plan.
Yes.
And that he was, allegedly, that these were his notebooks, right? So is that damning evidence? How is the defense going to downplay that moving forward?
Well, it's damning evidence, especially when let's think about it this way. When we first saw that video and there was nothing else, we was like, who could have done that? Who is that? We can't even identify that person by face. Now with that notebook and the notes that he also had, it takes identity off the table. So it's not about who done it. Instead, that notebook now gives us more insight as to what was on his mind when he decided to take a gun and fire twice into Brian Thompson. So it's damning for the defense, helpful for the prosecution. However, it does give us an argument that maybe there is an insanity defense, that because of his thinking, how his mind was working, that he was mentally disturbed. But I don't think that's going to win the day.
Just real quickly, because we're running out of time here. I mean, just based on that, it looks like he may have had a grander plan. Do you think his attorneys will ask for bail? Because so far they haven't.
You want to ask for bail because, as a defense attorney, it's just so much easier to defend someone when the person is not in custody. Just because, especially the Metropolitan Detention Center, you could be waiting hours to see a client, or you can show up and you're waiting hours and you don't see that client. And then the time is limited where you see them maybe for an hour or 2 hours. Sometimes you get to spend a couple hours. But then as a defense attorney, I don't have my cell phone. I don't have internet access. So you want the person out as opposed to in custody. Of course, the prosecution wants the person to remain in custody because it's easier to prosecute. Number one, you know where they're at, so there's no risk of flight, but also kind of sends a message to the general public.
Well, after that sight of just the walk, I don't know if
Exactly. I've never seen that, especially for the mayor to be there.
Well, yeah. Okay, Bernardus, thank you so much for being here. This case obviously is going to be, people are going to be laser focused on it, as are you.
Attention, you can say that again. This case has captivated the country, and today we expect Luigi Mangione to be here in court to be arraigned on those state charges, that is for murder and terrorism charges. Now, this is parallel to his federal case. In his federal case, he's facing stalking and murder charges as well. The 26-year-old is accused of shooting and killing Brian Thompson, the UnitedHealthcare CEO, in broad daylight on a Manhattan street earlier this month. Mangione was formally charged last week by the Manhattan DA with multiple counts of murder, including murder as an act of terrorism. His initial appearance in New York State Supreme Court was preempted by federal prosecutors bringing their own charges over the shooting. Those federal charges could carry the possibility of the death penalty. The maximum sentence for the state charges are life in prison without parole. Prosecutors have said the two cases will proceed on parallel tracks, with state charges expected to go to trial first. What we're watching now is this: how these parallel cases will in fact play out. Mangione's attorney is protesting the federal charges. She's calling it a highly unusual situation, adding that the federal stalking charges are not only inappropriate, but in conflict with the state's case. Back out here live, we do know that Mangione, in another unusual aspect of this case, is getting a lot of support from the public. In fact, he has a defense fundraiser that we have checked this morning. It's set up on the website Give, Send, Go, and right now it has raised more than $184,000. In Lower Manhattan, I'm Julie Millay, Pix 11 News.